Hello and welcome. This is going to be a short demonstration and explanation of my mining drill setups and why I use them and why I don't use them in servers. I've recently played on some servers, and assuming we're just sticking to official for the time being, you're limited to the amount of PCU that you can use to craft, and this is essentially your building limit for each player, and it's 20k. And there were some comments brought up about my previous basic miner, which is just intended to get you started, not so much as late game or advanced, obviously. But getting into it, we have a piston here, and this piston cost, if we take out our welder, this piston cost 100 PCU. A block is only 1. This conveyor here is 10. And as you can see, the piston's fully extended, and this only covers a distance of 6 blocks. Each block is roughly 2.5 meters in the game. And here we have a row of 10 conveyors. This is the same amount of PCU as one piston. So that's something to keep in mind when you're building anything in any kind of survival online server. And if we come over here, I would like to show this is a very common design, is using this pistons up with rotor, so that way this whole arm here extends. And typically you'd even have more pistons here that aren't fully extended here. And then you have all these pistons coming down. So this would mine a ton of material, because this is going to rotate, and then you have this double rotor set up here. Now notice I don't even have this on yet, and there can be a lot of sway. Just watch what happens if I just do that right there, right? Look how this whole arm here just moves. Now imagine you're in a laggy server with a limited amount of people. Everybody's doing something. Everybody probably has drills and mining rigs going on. Imagine how impossibly glitchy this would be. Nobody would even attempt to run this, even in space where there's no gravity. So what I have devised is stick to high surface area but low pistons, and the least amount of pistons that you use, the more stable this would be. Now you could drop this like say 3 pistons and you'd probably just be just fine. And this is like what you would use as a setup to just get you started until you can build something bigger with limited resources. A rotor is only 100 PCU. This is and this is 100 PCU. The pistons are like the most expensive for the least amount of distance that you could possibly travel. And each conveyor, regardless of what type it is only 10. So, as long as your drill comes directly below this axis here on this rotor from your outer pivot joint, you could essentially cover a much greater distance of material mined horizontally than you would vertically, going up and down. And this is especially great on servers because what you're most likely going to be needing a lot of late game is going to be uranium and ice, so you can get a safe zone going. Otherwise you're just going to be beaming out high out in space and just hoping that nobody spawns near enough, or an unknown signal doesn't spawn near you as well within 50k of your position. So if I just turn this on here, without even using inertia tensioner, this does shake some. Now if I grab one of the rotors to start out with, I'm going to set this one as low as possible. So we're just going to do like 0.1. Okay, so looks like the one that we activated was this one, because these two are still lined up. Yes, so this one up here is rotating. That's what I do to figure out which one is rotating first. Next, I'm going to come in here, and now by default in servers, something else to note is that this little option here to share inertia tensioner doesn't exist on servers, because there's Xbox players and there's processor limitations on servers versus playing single player. So a lot of these tutorials that you see to like make base miners are intended for single player use, not so much for server use. And we'll just turn this all the way up. But what this was set to by default is like 36 meganewtons. That is actually the limit in the server. Like, you can't do thousands. So that's something else to keep in mind. And then I'll just turn my braking and my torque all the way up on all the rotors. And then something else to do is that this is going to be shaking due to lag. And this can be a bit difficult to process. So take some heavy armor blocks and come out here, and what we're going to do is we're going to play with physics a little bit here. And we're going to confuse the programming just a little bit by having these odd shapes that kind of go up and away from the center point here of this plane. And what this will do is create some physics dynamics, and it'll make it run a bit more stable from this axis here. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. And each heavy armor block weighs like 3,000 pounds, and this is a late game addition that you would add to this. You wouldn't do this like immediately. And since there's nothing on this side, you could even go up like this, because it's not going to hit anything. And notice I put these blocks in line with these conveyor tubes because there's more space, because this is going to shake. And then like right here where you have a box, put like an angle, that way you know it's not going to touch. And this basically stabilizes it a lot more than if it was just the arms coming out. And I promise you, if you're on a server, it's going to be a lot less stable than this. This is like heaven for an engineer who is on a server if it actually ran this smooth, excuse me. And then you want your bottom piston to spin faster than your rotor, sorry. You want your bottom rotor to spin faster than your inner rotor. And I'll usually keep this one at like 0.1, maybe 0.2 if it's a small one like this. And then this bottom one I'll set to 3. But we're in a bit of a situation here where if you run into this case where your piston is already like in the ground by like a block here or half, set this to like 0.1 as well. And do control click, and this will let you set a specific amount, and it needs to be a different amount from the top one here. So I'm just going to do 0.2 because we don't want this to smack into the side of this wall here too fast, and especially on a server, and break the game. And then once everything is, you know, flattened, and you come down here and you notice that the drill is above the ground everywhere in the circle and diameter that it makes, then you can go to your piston and you can drop this by like 1.3 every time it's made a complete layer into the ground. Now, depending on your situation and where you're located and how fast you mine and how big this is, you know it's going to take more time to mine. So, if you wanted to set this up as auto, you could come in here and you could just set this maximum distance all the way up. You could turn your velocity to like negative 0.0001, which is like a 10,000th of a meter a second. And you could do some math and you could run 60 times that distance, which would give you how far it would travel downwards in a minute, and then do another 60, and that would give you the distance traveled in an hour. Next, over here, if you wanted to greatly expand on this principle and idea, you could use the same blocks and weights to balance out these, but I left it bare bones so it's exposed and you're able to demonstrate well. I wouldn't go much further than 2 pistons on a design like this. Now, something else that you'll want to consider is definitely adding some weights on this. The top doesn't quite matter quite so much because there's nothing in the way here. Using a design like this is not exactly server friendly, but it can be done. I have used these ideas in a server. Something like this, though, I just wouldn't even attempt. It's too much clang, as they say. And there's just too many arguments with the physics in the game when you're running on a server, and this would, I guarantee you, break within like the same day you build it. Also, welding. Welding is also an issue in servers. So as you're welding this and you're adding weight to this block here, instead of it just instantly appearing like it is in creative, it's gonna shake. So that's another reason why this would just be unheard of and completely impractical on a server building something like this. This is something that you would only build in survival. And even then it would still give you problems. So over here I can add this counterweight, and then I can do the same to these. And then what I can have is a drilling rig set up. And let's play with the physics again here. You could use half slabs here if you're really worried about the bounce and it touching your conveyors. And then something else to consider is don't leave your drill setup running when you're offline. Because if no one else is around within, like, say 20k, 15k, and you come back, I find this very funny. I was on a server and I was explaining this principle, and someone was like, oh, well, it sounds like you have a processor or graphics card issue, so it must be a personal issue. And I'm like, no, voxels are going to load in before the grids themselves do, when you first initially load into the game. And so if you leave this running and it's deeper below the voxel limit, there is the potential for the voxels to be processed first and then the grids, and this is already under the voxels, and so it will destroy this and explode instead of getting to keep it and its process be counted and all this other stuff and processed correctly. Whereas in single player, it's not an issue, because when you leave the server, your single player server, everything is just where it was when you come back. On a server, it's trying to process all of that. And then also it will cause a lot of lag, and then so you might get server problems. So always turn off your rotors and your pistons when you leave, and they'll just be there when you come back. Unless, of course, you get raided or don't have a safe zone, which is why you'd build this in the first place, so you can get ice. But anyways, enough ranting. We'll start this up. So I'm going to grab all my rotors, and this by default will not be an option, but I'm going to turn it on for survival's sake. Turn up all my power here. Pistons will do the same. This is also limited in survival. It's like 1,000 meganewtons instead of this ridiculous number. And we'll just leave this alone. Next, I'll try and find the rotor I'm looking for by just doing 0.1 on axis of rotation. So, it looks like we got lucky and found our first one there. So, now this actually needs to move way slower than 0.1. Especially if you're in the ground in this situation. If you're in this situation here where your drill is below the surface, just run the bottom two first and then go to this one. Because the further you go out from this axis here, the greater the velocity on the outside, and so you could quite possibly run into some serious issues. So like set this one to like 0.01. I don't really have to worry about it too much though, because not just because I'm in creative, but because I managed to build this like perfectly flat with ground. Next, find our next rotor here, and we'll just go ahead and set this one to like 0.1. And you want to take this as slow as possible. Okay, so we found this one. It'll probably be in order, because chances are you built from out and then down. So it's not too difficult to find. And I like to get my rotors going before the drill, unless of course the drill is in the ground, then you're forced to do that. And so this one we'll just set to 2. Then we'll grab our drill and we'll turn this on. And notice it digs even though it's not touching the voxels. And this is actually ideal. So in this situation, I would just leave this alone at this point and not even bother with setting up the pistons to drop. And then once I get a clear picture of the path that it has and what it's able to drill in that amount of time, then I'll set up my pistons to automatically drop it, like say 10,000th or even 100,000th of a meter a second, if I just wanted to truly fully automate this. You could also set up a button to grab all of your pistons and your rotors if you have the patience for that, and you could just click a button, and this button could toggle all of your pistons and rotors and drill off, and then that way you don't have to go in the control panel each time and do that manually. If any of this information was helpful to you, please consider subscribing and liking the video, and I appreciate each and one of you for watching and subscribing. And until next time, have a good one.